evening and welcome to another episode of Vantage Point. We've got a lot of material to cover this week, and one of particular interest, Dr. Jayatilaka, I think, to the entire country is that the cabinet, which was supposed to be 20 or 30, has now doubled in size to 40. The number of deputy ministers has doubled, the number of state ministers again almost doubled. This national government concept, the SLFP, the party of the president, joining with the primarily UNP government, what exactly is happening here? Wasn't this supposed to be something that was an idea post-election, post-general election?
Well, it's an idea whose time has come, according to the powers that be, obviously. Nadeem, you know, of course, of the fundamental assumption of a multi-party democracy is that competition is the best thing that could happen to the citizen, political competition. So that is why you have a government and an opposition. The opposition makes constructive criticism of the government rectifies its errors,
and most importantly, the citizen has a choice.
Absolutely.
Especially in a bipartisan democracy, the citizen has a choice. They can either vote, for example, in the States, either Republican or Democrat. If they're dissatisfied with one, they can vote in the other.
It's a principal marketplace.
But see, this what is this? It's like the Republicans and the Democrats deciding to vote for all bills in Congress together.
Well, Nadeem,
where's the criticism?
The concept of the national government is for use in highly exceptional circumstances. It's like a fire extinguisher. Now, it was in use in the 20th century in the context of the Second World War and its immediate aftermath. In Britain during the Second World War, we had a national government, and then in Germany under Konrad Adenauer, you had the Grand Coalition in order to reconstruct Germany from the ashes, as it were. In Sri Lanka, not only do you not have such a situation, when you had something that came close during 30 years of war, we did not set aside the competitive principle. We had coalition governments. We've had coalition governments before the war, during the war, and after the war. That's different. But the two major parties suspending constructive criticism and competition and converging as a government is something we didn't do even at the worst of times. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. There is no logic, no rationality for the formation of a national government. Now, it doesn't benefit, either the country or the parties concerned. It might benefit the project of certain elements or personalities or players, but it doesn't help either the UNP or the SLFP, let alone the country and society.
Let's say it's not in keeping with, as you say, with the principles of competitive democracy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what you were talking about, it doesn't help the parties. If there is no political advantage, let's look at this from a political point of view, purely political point of view. If there is no political advantage, why is it that the leaders of the two main parties in this country, the UNP and the SLFP, have decided to sort of band together and do this little thing?
Well, it might be in the interest of the leaders, and it also depends on who you consider a leader. I think that it's quite transparent that there is a troika that runs the country today, and that's the elected president who is legitimate, President Maithripala Sirisena, but also two others who have not been elected. One is Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, who has not yet won an election, and the other is former president, and I mean quite a while back, Madam Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga. Now, it would seem to be the case that, as in most troikas, any two can outweigh the third and either neutralize the third or drag him or her along with them. That's the way the mathematics works. So obviously, at least two of the three have agreed on this formula, irrespective of whether it would help their respective parties. It all depends on how you see the interests of your party, whether you consider your party to be as important as your own interests.
Well, let's look at the senior members of the SLFP, though, and even senior members of the UNP. If it's not in their interest, why would they go along with it?
Well, Nadeem, I mean, people do things that are not in their interests and don't do things that are in their interests for roughly two reasons. One, they don't have a clear understanding, a clear perception of their own interests. Rational self-interest. That's important. The other, even if they do, they don't have the guts. Now, let us unpack this. Let's take the UNP. The UNP was not elected to government this time, but some of them are trying to do some work. For instance, Sajid Premadasa and so on. They're trying to push things forward. There are those in that government who should have been in better places, such as Harsha or Iran, who should have been the Minister of Finance, but still they're in there. Now, how does it help to have an infusion of SLFP members who have an eye on the next election, just as the UNP guys have an eye on the next election, and therefore would work not together, but in order to benefit oneself electorally? So, take housing and Samurdhi. Sajid and Dilan, they might get on well. I'm sure they do. At least they'll pretend to. But how can you really work together? You come from two different parties, two notions of housing and Samurdhi, two styles of work, two political cultures, and you're in competition, or you will be in competition at the next election. Now, it was originally intended that this national government would be constructed after an election. That again is not a good thing because you forego the healthy competition between the parties, but still there's a kind of a logic. Each party would have known just how strong it was in the national arena, and then that would have been behind them. You know who's the top dog, so you work with that party in a national government. But now each party thinks that he or that it is or is about to be the top dog at the expense of the other, because the other is going to be the main competitor at the upcoming election.
But this is my worry. Now, when you have the two top parties in the country sort of colluding together in a national government, which does not involve a lot of the other parties, apart from the JHU and the SLMC, minority parties, when you have those two sitting together in government, any public disaffection with the government is disaffection with not only the UNP but also the SLFP.
Yes.
So thereby the whole idea of restoring bipartisan democracy is lost. Won't it lead to the further fracturing of bipartisan democracy and the emergence of lots of other parties?
You've got it right, Nadeem. In fact, this represents a needless acceleration of the crisis of the two-party system, because it's no longer a two-party system. You put them together and there will be inevitably a crisis of the party system. Instead of two moderate parties competing with each other, when you put them in one basket, then discontent has to find another focus. Now, if one is lucky, it will find a parliamentary focus, but it is possible that when two parties get together, they would not want to be challenged within Parliament, and they might even do what President Jawardana so disastrously did in December 1982, that is to seek to postpone a scheduled parliamentary election by means of a fraudulent and coercive referendum, which is what opened the doors to the volcanic decade of the 1980s, which became another decade in the 90s, and so on and so forth. It all started with the referendum and the closing off of the safety valves, which were supposed to be open in early 83, before July. Now, that is my real worry, that once you start this ball rolling, then you try to safeguard what you have because you know it's slipping away. And this is needless. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party is going to be damaged in its electoral prospects, there's no point really in holding office for a couple of months or even a year until next April when elections are constitutionally mandated. When there's not going to be anything much to say when you go out to bat for your party. You've been sleeping with the enemy, and what are you going to say on the morning after? How are you going to criticize Mr. Vikram Singh's UNP? So it's not going to help the SLFP. And when the two parties find themselves in a fix, then the same people who decided on the national government may take it to the next level and say, well, maybe we'll postpone the election. And then it's a different ballgame. I mean, you might have made General Fonseca Field Marshal in order to take care of whatever might arise beyond the parliamentary arena. But, social forces cannot be stopped. Once you get the basics wrong, then it becomes volatile, unpredictable, and even volcanic.
Because the understanding is, like you said, the discontent has to sort of find other focuses, which could lead to a rise in certain forces. I mean, it might not necessarily be to parties in parliament like the JVP. I mean, we probably won't see something like what happened in the United States, where the Whig Party went out and the Republican Party came in. Now, I also want to sort of understand in this whole national government concept how the 19th Amendment is going to figure into this.
Well, I think that's one of the things it was about. I mean, there's no war, there's no post-war reconstruction problem. There isn't a grand task which requires the energies of the whole nation. There's no tsunami. I mean, there was, but we got past that while remaining within traditional coalition politics. So what is the agenda? I think there is one. I mean, let's be charitable. This is not some lunacy. There's an agenda that needs to be embarked upon, and it's already happening. The first decision of what the Daily News quite rightly calls the joint cabinet. It was a little shy to use the term the national government, and all credit to the editors of the Daily News. The joint cabinet met and is supposed to have ratified the 19th Amendment, not in its gazetted form, but in its original draft form. Now, what's the difference between the original draft and the 19th Amendment as gazetted? There was a debate in the cabinet, and there was a rearguard action fought by the JHU, Champika Ranavaka, and the Rajita Senaratna, the faction that came over with President Sirisena, reinforced by the Sri Lanka Freedom Party in opposition, which said, look, we are not for the gutting of the executive presidency, we promised the reform, and that's what we are for. And the original draft goes too far. And therefore there was some modification, some degree of moderation. It still was a little dodgy, the gazetted text, but it was a modest improvement on the original 19th Amendment. Now, maybe it's because this week is the week of the Prime Minister's birthday, 66th birthday, which is why I'm wearing green. He's been given a huge present. The SLFP has come in, and the first thing they've done is say, that's okay, you don't have to stick to the Gazette. You can go back to the original 19th Amendment, the draft, which actually claws much of the power away from the presidency and puts the presidency under prime ministerial control, because the PM is the head of government and head of cabinet, and the president has always to act on the advice of the prime minister. So it's not what one would have thought. One would have thought that the SLFP was brought in to strengthen President Sirisena's hand and dilute the 19th Amendment further, push it further towards the middle. Instead, the SLFP has been brought in, one wonders by whom, and they've helped the traditional four, the UNP, by agreeing to the original, far more radical, quasi-abolitionist draft of the 19th Amendment.
The SLFP having their leader as the president of the country, why would they seek to undermine his power?
Well, it's quite transparently clear, Nadeem. It's all, I mean, it's literally...
Well, I'm smirking a little bit because it might be transparently clear to you and I, but for the benefit of our viewers, please explain what is transparently clear.
The country is not being run, and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party is not being run by President Sirisena alone. There is the ex-president in the room, and I do not mean the recent ex-president, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, who seems to be mobbed wherever he goes. The last was at Belangvilla. I saw some vehicle crawling, the drone cameras showed something. I thought these were some sort of religious, some vehicle carrying something religious which couldn't move. It turned out to be Mahinda Rajapaksa's four-wheel drive. No, I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about President Kumaratunga. Because while there's been a huge fuss about Mahinda Rajapaksa trying to rock the boat of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, what's really going on is that Madam Kumaratunga has, as she always wanted to, begun to influence the destinies, began to run the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. Now that's not a secret. She's present while appointing organizers. She was present and referred to at a state function, though she doesn't have a state role. She's not elected. She's not an elected member of government. She's not an elected member of the state. She was
patron of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party.
Yeah, but the Sri Lanka Freedom Party didn't hand over all those acres back to from the army to the original owners, which is probably a good thing. But it's not the SLFP's property, and it's certainly not from Horagolla. This is what was acquired by the military through heavy fighting and which was transferred by the state back to the original owners. Now, what was former President Kumaratunga doing there? President Sirisena told us what she was doing there. Ethnic reconciliation will be under the sagacious guidance of former President Kumaratunga, though she is not elected to do that job. And that's probably the most important job in Sri Lanka today. Now,
no, the president is elected. He can appoint who he sees fit to lead ethnic reconciliation.
He can appoint whom he sees fit according to the constitution, Nadeem. I mean, you know, something as important as ethnic reconciliation cannot be handed over. And if it's just a task force she's heading, well, that's a subordinate role. It doesn't put her on the same level, as is evident in all the TV footage from January 8th onwards, and actually from before. She's on the same level as Maitri President Sirisena and unelected Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. It's Maitri, Ranil, Chandrika in God knows what hierarchical order. So, the SLFP has been shunted into government. I don't know whether it was President Sirisena's decision alone, because they've not gone in there and strengthened his hand. They've supported the downloading of executive power to the Prime Minister. Now, this takes me back a few days ago, when there was a deadlock in cabinet, and Champika Ranaweka and Rajitha were fighting back on behalf of the presidency and saying, look, we have to reform this, not gut it. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe said, I'll go talk to Chandrika about this. I mean, it's on the record. She promised me. And then at another point in the meeting, President Sirisena said, well, I'll consult Ranil and Chandrika. Now, Chandrika is not elected to be consulted on anything of this magnitude. So, it's a troika. And if two agree on something, then the third is little choice but to go along. And I think that's what happened. There is agreement between Ranil and Chandrika on the form the 19th Amendment should take. And this is very clear because Jayampati Wickramaratne is essentially Chandrika's man who was doing the draft on behalf of Ranil. just as Foreign Minister Mangala Samaraveera was always politically close to Chandrika, but he's the UNP's Foreign Minister. So on certain tracks, ethnic reconciliation, external relations, it's a Ranil Chandrika Doomvirat rather than the Maitri Ranil Chandrika Troika. Within the Troika there's a Doomvirat. And that's why the SLFP has been shunted in. Why it allowed itself to be shunted in, I don't know. Maybe it's because the leader of the opposition, Mr. Nimal Saripala de Silva, is also a CBK loyalist. So inside this story is the explicit intention of former President Kumaratunga way back in 2005 to play the role of Sonia Gandhi to a presidential Manmohan Singh. And this was stated by Mr. Mangala Samaraveera in 2006 when he wrote an open letter to President Mahinda Rajapaksa and said that Chandrika should remain the leader of the party and that Mahinda should not strive to take over the leadership of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, though he had just been elected president of the country. And the model was that Chandrika would play Sonia and Mahinda or whoever would be Manmohan Singh. Now, Mahinda Rajapaksa is no Manmohan Singh. And also Manmohan Singh wasn't elected by the votes of the majority of India. He was appointed, he was picked. So at that time the role of Sonia was Sonia but so far, because it was Mahinda, and Mahinda wasn't going to play ball. Now she's playing Sonia Gandhi. And she has nominated somebody who is, despite the fact that he's the elected executive president, is closer to playing the role that Dr. Manmohan Singh played.
Now, with all this going on, with all of this happening in government, with the national government coming together, the passage of the 19th Amendment is pretty much guaranteed. We'll see that happening in the weeks to come.
It should be found in the Supreme Court if somebody goes there, but still, it looks like the dice is loaded.
It looks like the dice.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard Cohen, the song which is everybody knows the dice was loaded.
Yeah.
He also says everybody knows the good guys lost.
But what I want to ask you is, where does former President Mahinda Rajapaksa fit into this mix? I know that he's said in public that he's observing and that he's taking some rest. Viveka Ganna is what he said. But where does he fit into in this mix?
Well, for a guy who's taking a rest, he pops up every other day, doesn't he? I mean, but he's managing to do something.
No, he's traveling a fair bit for someone who's taking rest.
Yeah. I think he said he's taking a rest from politics. But he's managing to do two things simultaneously, which are very difficult to do. I mean,
what is he trying to do, really? Because all of that traveling, there's a purpose. There's definitely again, there is an agenda there. I mean, former President Mahinda Raj is not really a man who would start doing something without a motive. There is a goal.
Well, I think
what appears to be the goal.
I think he didn't expect when he left Temple Trees to be back in action so soon, to be back in the public eye. I can disclose that he was very gracious. I still have it on my phone, I think. At 3:30 in the morning, I was at home. I got a call, and it was the President Rajapaksa, to thank me and just tell me that, they lost and he has decided to leave. This was before the poll results had come in. That's why I always laugh when I hear that there was some kind of coup attempt. I mean, if there's a guy who's planning a coup isn't going to bother to phone me and say, hey, thanks for everything, I've decided I'm leaving. Now, when he went back home, I think he was surprised by the instantaneous public presence. I mean, the people, not all the people, but the significant amount of people kept going there and talking to him and saying, look, we want you back. Now that's new in Sri Lankan politics. That's fairly rare even in international politics. It takes time. Even if you want to make a comeback, you got to drum up support. He didn't have to. I don't think he got the rest he wanted. These are social forces on the move. And these social forces were looking around, they felt bereft, and they latched on to him, and they've been drawing him out. You're a movie fan like I am. Do you remember Al Pacino?
Every time I try to get out, they keep drawing me back in.
They keep drawing me back. They keep dragging me back in, right?
I don't really think former President Mahinda Rajapaksa
really want to get out.
Would appreciate your comparing him to the
Well, I like Al Pacino. And I have always said that Mahinda is an anti-hero. I mean, he's not a villain, as people say, and he's not the sort of hero, the chevalier sans peur, sans reproche, I mean the spotless hero. He's a hero who's also an anti-hero. But this is what happened. I think the people started pulling him back. Now he's responding to that. And he's probably seeing an opening. The politics of South Asia and the Third World, but not only the Third World, sees this comeback.
But an opening to do what though? What could be going on in that matter?
Well, what does he do? Who is he? He's a political animal. An opening to stay in the political field, I suppose. That's what he does. That's his family.
As part of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party?
Ideally, I suppose so. I think that's what he thinks. Whether that's what he'll be able to do, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, look at the French municipal election results. I gave my credentials, I presented my credentials to President Sarkozy. And when he lost, I was there when President Hollande was elected, I never thought I'd see Sarkozy back that soon. And there were cases, mind you, against President Sarkozy. There was a scandal. But there he is. His party has just won the municipal elections. So, comebacks take place.
But he still had a party.
He had a party. But people
Which
forget,
is my point.
People forget another thing. You know, D.S. Senanayake was not the leader of the UNP for the most part of his career. He was the leader of the Ceylon National Congress. There was no UNP. The UNP was something he formed. He left the Ceylon National Congress and he formed the UNP just before and for the purpose of the 1947 general elections. I mean, when you have a person of that charisma and authority, where he goes is the party, or is much of the party. Now, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party might have just done Mahinda Rajapaksa a service, though he didn't ask for it, by entering a coalition with its traditional foe, the United National Party. Most of the SLFers won't know what to do. And there's this familiar figure. Now, if somebody is very, very dumb, and I can't rule that out, they will do what J.R. Jayawardena did and when J.R. deprived Mrs. Bandanayake of her civic rights. That was one of the things followed up with the referendum which upended this country in the whole of the 80s and derailed the open economy and made stability an impossible dream. Now, short of that, I think Mahinda Rajapaksa, if he stays in democratic politics, if he's allowed to, and for the sake of stability, I would much prefer to have him on the inside looking out, than those social forces deprived of a democratic personality and on the outside looking in.
Very interesting thoughts. Now, I'd also like to move on. There's another topic that I wanted to cover. I mean, we can talk about the national government, the 19th Amendment, the triumvirate, and where the former president fits into the whole picture.
Which former president?
Immediate past.
Okay.
The immediate past president.
Okay.
We can talk about that for hours and hours on end, but I also wanted to touch on another development that we saw happening this last week. Remember Geneva Gate?
Ah, yes, of course. So Geneva Gate, you've got a new episode now. You've got one of the characters who's just been promoted, right?
We've got a very new episode happening there. So we've got the the former Foreign Secretary, who was at the center of this controversy, which also involved the former monitoring MP, Sergeant Divaskunowardena, who's been posted to Thailand. The Foreign Minister, when questioned about this report and if there was anything happening in this investigation, raised accusations against the person who had asked for that audit, former Ambassador Tamara Kurunayakam. Now, we saw reports in the media highlighting the career of former Ambassador Tamara Kurunayakam, particularly in the period that Minister Mangala Samaraweera was referring to, 1989-90, when she was working with the Mothers Front and incidentally...
She was working with Mangala Samaraweera.
With Mangala Samaraweera. So, but
I was on the other side, I was working with President Premadas. I remember these guys.
My question is, if Minister Mangala Samaraweera says that Tamara Kurunayakam was involved with the LTT in 1989-90, does that not by default also make him involved with the LTT in 1989-90?
I mean,
given that he was the one who was working with it.
I mean, it's crazy, Nadeem, because Tamara belongs to that tradition of people who happen to be of Tamil ethnicity who braved the opprobrium of very powerful emotional currents within their own community to stand against separatism. And this is a tradition that had many casualties, near casualties. I mean, you're talking about Lakshman Kadaragama, you're talking about Ketesh Loganathan, Neelan Tiruchelvam, Rajani Tiranagama. When I talk to Tamara, sometimes my mind blurs and I think I'm talking to Rajani. I mean, we're friends. Neelan, I said, Ketesh, all these people, many of them were killed, Douglas Devananda. These people stood up against the Tigers. Tamara represented her government and her country, Sri Lanka, during the most intense phase of the war, during the worst mobilization of the pro-Tiger diaspora. And before that, she never ever spoke on behalf of or was pro-Tiger in any way, and Mangala was really doing something very dastardly to make that allegation on television.
Something that I've seen happening where with this government, where a lot of stuff is said with no substance to back it up, is allegations are thrown around which have absolutely no meat. Now, Minister Mangala Samaraweera, having been the person who worked with MP Vasudeva Nanayakkara and Mahinda Rajapaksa and Tamara Kurunayakam at the time, would have been well aware that people were not going to buy this allegation. Why would he say something like that, is my question.
Well, I think there's a twisted logic to the whole thing. Look at the timing. Mangala Samaraweera stands up in Parliament, makes a strong pitch for the removal from the proscribed list of a large number of Tamil diaspora organizations, some of which were listed as LTT precisely by Sri Lankan intelligence. I'm not saying that that list should not be re-scrutinized. It should. And it should be limited to those who are demonstrably pro-Tiger, instead of having a kind of a blanket ban, which is what the Rajapaksa administration did. But that's not what Mangala is saying. Mangala is removing from the list of organizations which are proscribed everyone, including those who are pro-Tiger. I mean, DBS Jayaraj, a respected journalist, wrote at the time that he was opposed to the blanket ban. But he said about 6 of them are hardcore Tiger of these diaspora organizations. So Mangala removes these people from the list. He argues that they should be removed from the list. And then he accuses Tamara Kurunayakam, who has been anti-Tiger throughout her political life, of being pro-Tiger and having spoken for the Tigers.
What is the twisted logic?
The twisted logic is when you're turning right, signal left.
No, I mean, what is the intention? What
a diversion.
Intention?
A diversion.
A diversion from what?
A diversion from the fact that you're declassifying, that you're removing tigers or pro-tiger organizations from a list of those who are proscribed. So you don't want to be accused of being soft on the tigers. You just met Father Emmanuel and Surendiran, who aren't necessarily, well, Father Emmanuel is pro-tiger, but I'm not saying that he's a tiger or that Surendiran is a tiger, but they're certainly far more pro-tiger than Tamara Kunaragam ever was. So you want to divert attention from the fact that you're consorting with these people and that you're removing the ban on those that the security agencies have said are pro-LTT by pointing the finger at somebody who has been anti-LTT but who happens to be Tamil. So that's the twisted logic. And then you're also defending, he's also defending Shenuka Senaratne, and believe you me, there's a logic for that.
What's the logic for that?
Well, at least two things. One, Shenuka Senaratne was always very close to President Kumaratunga and her family. I'm not going to say just how close, but she was very close in the 1990s. That's one. Two, or at least three important matters, you might say two and a half. Shenuka Senaratne, together with Sajin Vasgunodhan in one case, the sort of Bonnie and Clyde of the foreign ministry, gave President Rajapaksa very seriously bad advice, which put him in serious trouble. And I think that this is her reward. Now, whether she did this wittingly or not, I don't know, but I can tell you what they are. In 2008, when she was High Commissioner in London, and I'm not talking about the renovation, there was another renovation problem or housing problem there, the residence, wherever she goes, there seems to be something to do with the residence of the ambassador or High Commissioner, but that's not what I'm talking about. In 2008, she addressed a staff meeting of the Sri Lanka High Commission in London, the report of which was written up, a dissenting report by a staffer there, Walter Jayasinghe, someone who had been recruited from LA to handle publicity. He was shocked. The report appeared in the Asian Tribune. It was uncontradicted. Shenuka told her staff, Ambassador Dayan Jayatilaka is going to be fired from Geneva and I shall be replacing him. And she said this 1 year before it actually happened. So, with my firing, as is fairly well known, things started going downhill in Geneva. We lost 3 times, and the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration, for the first time, you found it under siege. That was the first defeat, out at the periphery in Geneva. Now, how did Shenuka know in 2008 that I was going to be replaced and that she was going to be the one who replaced me? And she was confident enough to say it, and never contradict it when the report appeared criticizing her for doing that. Either she was one of those who canvassed for it, or she knew what was going to happen and she was party to the plot, the conspiracy, which did not help either Sri Lanka or Mahinda Rajapaksa, as it turned out. That was the first breach in the wall, the outer wall of defense. Even more importantly, she followed this up with a disastrous recommendation that President Rajapaksa should take over the chair of the Commonwealth. Now, in April 2011, there was a working dinner at then Foreign Minister G.L. Pirisa's house, presided over by President Rajapaksa. There were 15 people who were supposed to be the heavy hitters in the field of external relations. I happen to be one of them, who were invited for this working dinner. These included Basil Rajapaksa, Lalit Viratunga, Sajin Vasgunodhan, Palita Kona, Prasad Karevasam, Shenuka Senaratne, Aruni Vijayawardena, and so on and so forth. At that dinner, I said, you're making a mistake at the table, 15 people. Do not go for this Commonwealth chair. You will become a target. The country will become a target. The president will become. The president, I told him, you will become a target of the British. They will be able to whip up a campaign. This is exactly what happened with the Beijing Olympics, but Beijing could take the risk because it's so big. You become a magnet. You will have a target on your back, which is exactly what happened. The person who canvassed for Sri Lanka, for President Raja, who sold him the dead rope, was Shenuka. And I shan't mention names, but those who were seated next to me said, we said this too, but this is what happened. Now, Professor Vijay Singha has made another expose. You see, the first visible defeat that President Rajapaksa suffered was in London when he had to retreat in the face of pro-LTTE diaspora demonstrations when he went to address the Oxford Union. He couldn't do that. Now, Professor Vijay Singha has exposed the fact that our High Commissioner, Nihal Jayasinghe, and his deputy, his able deputy, Mr. P. Amza, sent in writing their recommendation that President Rajapaksa should not come and should not attend this, that it will be bad for him and for Sri Lanka. But Professor Vijay Singha says that it is Shenuka who advised that he make the trip, and Shenuka and Sajin were there. I also know, and everybody knows this because it was on television, that when we started losing in Geneva, it was Shenuka and Sajin who went along with the delegation and marginalized Tamara. Tamara held the line in September 2011 against the Canadian draft. But by 2012, she was so marginalized, she was not even able to sit during the session on Sri Lanka. Another country had to give her a seat, so you don't see her in that frame, you see her in a corner. It was Shenuka and Sajin who spearheaded the Sri Lankan team, and we lost. And what did they do after we lost? They fired Tamara Korunayagam from Geneva, and they tried to fire me from France, and the media picked it up, the Daily Mirror and so on and so forth. So they were responsible for the disasters in Geneva, they were responsible for the disaster with the Commonwealth, and naturally somebody like that, especially if they were close to the former president, has to be rewarded by being given the post that she requested, ambassador to Thailand, whether or not there's an inquiry and an audit report. It doesn't matter. So that's the logic.
Definitely a lot to take in. On the subject of external relations, India, the elephant in the room, as it were, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Sri Lanka.
It's a crowded room. You've got an elephant in the room. You've got two former presidents in the room.
It's a very, very, very crowded room, and
it's a zoo.
Yeah, the devolution of power and the Indo-Lanka fishing dispute, which seem to be the two primary talking points when it comes to Indo-Lanka relations. Not to mention nuclear cooperation now and Sampur, among other things. 13 plus. Is that still on the cards?
Well, yeah, I'd rather talk about that than the fishing thing. And there you have a simple solution. We know you shoot the fisherman, maybe you shoot the fish. I don't know. That's something else.
Solution.
But India, I must say, I was gratified that my wife and I were given the opportunity of being introduced to Prime Minister Modi at the reception, shook hands. He does have something. I mean, he's got something that you might describe as charisma. There's something about it. But that doesn't prevent me from making the critique that I made public after that, because Prime Minister Modi deviated from traditional Indian foreign policy, including his own, on the issue of the Sri Lankan state structure, as it were. Traditional Indian foreign policy has been that the 13th Amendment should be fully implemented and built upon. Those are the terms. He used that terminology himself, as did Manmohan Singh. Now, in Sri Lanka, he moved away from it. Building upon the 13th Amendment is what we would call 13 plus. But for the first time, Prime Minister Modi didn't use that terminology. Instead of saying early and full implementation and building upon it, which is the earlier language from 2009 to date, he said, go beyond. Now, as you know, building upon is vertical. Going beyond is horizontal. So that is very new and quite drastic. And he followed this up by making a clear reference to federalism. Now, in case one thought that it was just sharing India's experience, that doubt was dispelled, or that charitable interpretation was dispelled, because after he said it in Colombo, he went to Jaffna the next day, and in Jaffna he said, down in Colombo, I spoke in favor of federalism. So, it's very clear. That's a great deviation. The architects of the 13th Amendment, Rajiv Gandhi, J. Jayawardene, envisaged certain rectifications and improvements. There were residual issues, that was the term that was used at the time, but never something new, a new point of departure, going beyond the 13th Amendment towards federalism. I mean, if so, they would have tried. It couldn't be done. That's why you had the 13th Amendment, devolution within a unitary state. Now, the second thing, the second deviation was that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh didn't limit this to his bilaterals. Usually the Indian Prime Minister says this to the Sri Lankan President, and it's reflected in a joint text. But as the Indian Prime Minister, or a visiting Prime Minister, you never make those statements publicly when addressing the Parliament of another country. But Prime Minister Modi said this in our Parliament in Kotte earlier. He said this in the old Parliament building, which is now the Presidential Secretariat, with President Sirisena next to him. You don't make that kind of normative statement about the internal affairs and the political structure, the state structure of another country. You limit it to your bilaterals. And he went along to Jaffna the next day and mentioned that he had urged federalism. And Chief Minister Vigneshwaran, in his vote of thanks, said what he had said to the Hindu the day before Prime Minister Modi came, which is, we were always dissatisfied with the 13th Amendment. Even in 87 October, our leaders, including Mr. Sambandhan, wrote to Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi saying, this won't work. The 13th Amendment as it exists is an obstacle to Tamil political aspirations. He said that in his vote of thanks. He went on, Chief Minister Vigneshwaran, to say, we think that the powers of the Indian state, that is within India's federalism, he listed land, law and order, police powers, and internal security should be with the unit, with the council. So it's very clear, the roadmap is clear, and by saying what he did, Prime Minister Modi not only deviated from Indian policy hitherto and Indian practice and normal diplomatic practice of not saying this kind of thing publicly, but he has also given fuel, a fillip to the political aspirations in the north, which would make them a little more difficult to accommodate and make reconciliation a little more contentious. Now, I see this roadmap together with what we've been talking about this evening, that is the 19th Amendment in its radical form, the deconstruction of the strong center, the executive presidency, the national government, and the agenda of the national government, and the naming by President Sirisena of former President Kumaratunga as the one who will guide the process of ethnic reconciliation. President Kumaratunga, when she was in office, never believed in the 13th Amendment. That's why she didn't try to implement it fully. She started with something that went beyond the 13th Amendment in the direction of federalism, which was the so-called packages of 1997, 95 and 97, which were for redefining Sri Lanka as a union of regions. So I think the pieces of the jigsaw fit very snugly together.
Thank you very much, Dr. Danja Tilaka. Unfortunately, we're running short of time. We'll have another jigsaw puzzle ready for you in a fortnight. Just a reminder, you can catch up on any past episodes of Vantage Point, and this episode as well. You can watch it again on our website, Newsfirst.lk, or on our YouTube channel, Newsfirst Sri Lanka. Good night and goodbye.